uh, welcome back after tea. We'll now be starting up with the session which is on scaling up of renewable energy. So for that, I welcome all the distinguished speakers of the session who are here with us today. First of all, I'd like to request our moderator, Dr. Anuradha Ganesh, Chief Technical Advisor and Director, Cummins, to initiate the session. Thank you, ma'am. I'd also request all the panelists to please come up on stage so that we can start with this session. Thank you.
Good afternoon, all of you. One of the ill effects of having a cataract operation is I can read only with this and I can see you only without it. So I'll be moving up and down. So pardon me for that. Please be seated and please, I request you to switch off your mobiles. Good evening again, and a very warm welcome to this session on the scaling up of renewable energy at the CII 17 Sustainability Summit on building a sustainable tomorrow, transforming risks into opportunities. We have today with us very eminent speakers, Shri Dinesh Dayanand Jagdale, Joint Secretary, MNRE, Government of India. We have with us Mr. Srivatsan Iyer, Global CEO, Hero Future Energies. We have Mr. Manoj Gupta, Vice President, Renewable Energy Business Asia, Fortum India Private Limited. We unfortunately will be missing Mr. Sanjeev Agarwal today, who could not make it, but he was supposed to be here. I warmly welcome all of you. We in India live in a very paradoxical situation. On one hand, we are the lowest in per capita emissions of CO2 equivalent. On the other, we are one of the largest emitters of GHG emissions. We are the third largest consumer of the primary energy, and yet we struggle to supply to the entire population with reliable and affordable energy. We have a large population and we have a high dependency on the fossil fuels in the primary energy mix and electricity generation. We are also a growing economy moving fast towards the Atmanirbhar Bharat. With all this and being fully aware of all this and India's vulnerability with the incidences and intensity of the heat wave set to rise, changes in the monsoon and precipitation patterns, increase in the cyclones in the coastal regions, our pollution problem, our Honorable Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, committed to the Panchamrit, the 5 promises at the COP26 last year, one of which is the 50% of its energy requirements from the renewable energy by 2030. India has also set targets to reduce India's total projected carbon emissions by 1 billion tons by 2030, reduce the carbon intensity of the nation's economy by less than 45% by the end of the decade, achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2070, and expand India's renewable energy installed capacity to 500 gigawatts by 2030. Owing to with all these technological developments and the steady policy support from the government, the private sectors have risen to the occasion. And the renewable energy is growing at a faster rate in India than any other major economy. As per the CEA estimates, by 2029-30, the share of renewable energy generation would increase from 18% to 44%, while that of the thermal is expected to reduce to below 50%. During this session, we shall discuss how India can scale up on the renewable energy capacities to achieve the aspirational targets. It will explore the action plans by businesses and policy makers to accelerate the usage of renewable energy, including all of them: bioenergy, thermal, hydropower, ocean, solar, but mainly on the solar, wind, hydrogen, as I see the experts here, in the pursuit of sustainable development, energy access, security, and low carbon economic growth in the country. It's my privilege now to invite Sri Dinesh Dayanand Jagdale to share his valuable inputs and views to our fellow panelists and participants.
Thank you. Dr. Anuradha, Mr. Srivatsan Iyer, Mr. Manoj Gupta, dear colleagues, friends, good evening to all of you. It's my privilege, again, as I keep on telling, to be amongst you today, to be a part of this 17th Sustainability Summit. And the topic that you are going to discuss and I'm going to address for this initial session is on scaling up renewable energy. The Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, which I work for and I'm representing here, is in the forefront of bringing in the kind of acceleration that is required to scale up from where we were, where we are, and where we need to go. So obviously you would, I'm sure there has been a lot of deliberations today, and I do understand that the session sustainability is a wider topic. So you need to deliberate on various aspects of sustainability, and RE, renewable energy, is one of those mediums through which we can reach close to our goals. As Professor mentioned about the NDC commitments that we have now given, we are talking about 50% of the electric capacity that we would be having by 2030 would come from non-fossil based sources. And when we are talking about 50%, so there is a 50% of renewable energy penetration into the electricity grid. And there has been efforts, policies, and a lot of private sector involvement into the entire growth story of Indian renewable energy. So if we just take 2 to 3 minutes on the statistics where we are, if you really look as of today's numbers, out of a 404 gigawatt of grid electric capacity that we have installed in the country, 170 gigawatt of capacity is coming from non-fossil based sources, which takes us to almost 42% of the total capacity that is installed in the country. Out of this 170 gigawatts, if you leave about the nuclear, which is also non-fossil, 163 odd gigawatt is coming from pure play renewables, which is contributed by solar to a majority extent, followed by hydro, wind, bioenergy, and other aspects which are slightly lesser in capacities, but they do contribute to that level. If you look at what, I think this growth, look back for almost 7 to 8 years, and then what we are in 2022. The compounded annual growth rate of this success, of this capacity additions, has been phenomenal. At least 14 to 15% is the compounded growth rate that, because of the industry, because of the private sector, because of the trust by the international developers, international financiers, domestic industry, the manufacturers, and all these related stakeholders have put in the Indian regulatory regime, as well as the Indian scenarios or the political scenario that we all work for, and we are looking at it. That is what we do, is one of those elements which has made this possible. From 2022 to 2030, When we talk about 50% of our capacities to be coming from non-fossil, and if we assume, if we take the same report that you all are aware of, the demand that is going to come by 2030, or the demand that is expected to rise by 2030, which is around 800 gigawatt plus. So we would definitely have a scenario where 400 gigawatt of RE will be there from renewable energy will be there. Obviously, majority will come from pure RE, which do mention of wind, solar, and hydro. This hydro includes large hydro as well. Whereas the Panchamrut, which Honorable Prime Minister has declared or mentioned in COP26, does mention of 500 gigawatt of non-fossil, the emission intensity reduction, and several other elements, which one of them is life, and life for sustainability. And there is where I think the renewable energy plays an important role. Now, to do scale up of this renewable energy, there are few aspects which I will mention before you, and I would like all of you in your individual capacities, in your corporate capacities, to really enforce upon and review individually that how can everyone, each individual, contribute to some kind of renewable energy capacity addition to make everybody's life sustainable. So let us look at the large parks. Let us look at large wind farms, solar farms. And obviously there are a few investors, few groups, few portfolios which are being created, which are bringing in the best of the technology, best of the funding abilities, and creating large size parks. So that is one way of adding capacities into the electricity grid, which we are doing. Solar is one example, which in 2014 to 2022, almost 300 times growth. We are on 60 gigawatt, almost close to 60 gigawatt now in terms of capacities. Just today, the Cabinet, Government of India has approved the second phase of the production link incentive scheme. So while we are not only adding capacities, there is also being focus on domestic manufacturing capabilities. And there has been an incentive provided to encourage domestic manufacturing in solar in this country. We had the PLI phase 1, which was issued, and LOAs were granted, 4,500 crores, which would obviously expect a capacity addition of 8.8 gigawatts. Now with this and another 19,500 crores, we expect that the total capacity in this country would reach around 65 gigawatt of annual production. Now 65 gigawatt is a number which will not only meet our domestic requirement, but also India will emerge as one of those exporters of solar panels and cells and modules. So this is a very good signal for all of us, and some of you must be really harnessing on this opportunity, will encash this opportunity to bring in the best of class, high efficiency, latest of the technologies into this country. Wind has been a success story since 1990s. I think last 4 decades, wind has shown its ability. Wind brought India into the world map. We have a robust manufacturing capacity of almost 12 to 13 gigawatts year on year. All the international players, technology players are available in India, which have their own shops or which production facilities in India. So apart from the conventional wind and solar, the ministry is now looking at how can we expand the horizon beyond what is done today. For example, if you look at wind, we talk about onshore wind, we are now looking at offshore wind. Offshore wind, obviously, it requires some initial hand-holding. We are trying to get some support from the government on that. We have targeted 30 gigawatts capacity addition by 2030, but a trajectory of almost 37 gigawatt of tendering or bids that we expect to bring in year on year has been already delivered in the public domain. We are looking at now bringing in the first tender for under different models. We are working on the draft. So offshore is one such element wherein I think India has a long coastline, 7,600 kilometers, out of which Tamil Nadu and Gujarat coast have shown immense potential. We have 70 gigawatt of potential in those states itself, but the total potential that is estimated by some experts is almost 200 gigawatts. So there's a large number to really encash upon. And beyond 2030, when we talk of our net zero goals, I think offshore is going to play a very dominant role in creating different kind of energy elements, including green hydrogen, as we are going to, as some of our speakers will talk today. That is another aspect which is going to bring in scaling in RE. Now, the biggest challenge what we all feel is the intermittency in the source itself, wind and solar. And therefore, while we are in, today we have almost 42% of capacity, but that includes hydro as well. When we speak in energy terms, we are still a number which is 14 to 15% in energy capacities if we don't exclude hydro. So as this capacities would grow, I think firmness would be critical, and the firmness in delivery of power or dispatchable power will come from storage. So we have a hydro, we'll bring in pumped hydro, we will bring in battery storages. The first tender has already shown good success. And there will be another technologies, some new technologies coming in storage, which we will like to embrace upon. So storage will be critical for us. The government is keen on working on it and bringing in scale, bringing in economies of scale to ensure that the delivered cost of a firm energy from a renewable energy resource is also to the tune where a DISCOM can really afford. So storage, offshore wind, the plain vanilla wind and solar continues. There are different models. Floating solar, I think, is also on the anvil that has come up largely well. And out of all this, I think when we speak of the energy content in this country, we are talking of only 18% is from the electricity sector. There is a large 82% which still requires different kind of feedstocks that would really take care of to decarbonize those sectors. Leaving about agriculture, let's focus on the industry. If you talk of industry, I think green hydrogen will also play an important role to enable us to faster decarbonization. So green hydrogen is the one which we are focusing on. The green hydrogen mission, which the Honorable PM has announced, the final mission document is expected to be released very soon. It is in the final stages of approval. But that has a larger pie, that has a larger say in this economy, in this renewable energy growth story. Not only it will increase the renewable energy capacities to produce green hydrogen, but by the way of green hydrogen, we will be able to decarbonize those hard to abate sectors. One, I think, obviously the low-hanging fruit is fertilizers, refineries. When we move on to steel, cement, and other industries, and also at some point of time, transportation, mobility will be addressed along with the storage electric vehicles, the hydrogen-based fuel cell vehicles, which also we are seeing there are a couple of industries across the country who have brought in some good concepts into this. So green hydrogen is there, which will enable us to scale up. Now these technologies, which whether offshore wind, storage, or green hydrogen, need some handholding in the beginning. We have seen solar, what happened in 2010 and what we are there in 2022, there has been a phenomenal cost reduction. And we do believe that by giving initial support to these technologies, we will also be able to get some good results in another 3 to 4 years time. And then these technologies will be able to survive on its own on a standalone basis. Obviously, storage, the green hydrogen element, offshore, plus the ability to produce in-house of solar modules, wind already is there. So combinedly, we are looking at a renewable energy scenario where India, based on the targets that we have set by 2030, if all of these that we are talking about goes very well, I think we are very close to reach our targets. We will definitely, obviously the targets which we set in 2015 in COP21 in France, we had talked about 40% to be reached by 2030. We have reached much more ahead of advance, 9 years ahead of schedule. And similarly, but one thing is to be kept in mind is that all this will happen if there is electricity demand. Now, unless there is demand, which on the contrary, we have seen very good results post-COVID. I think the demand has increased by almost 18 times what was there in the previous month. So there has been some good 18%, not 18 times, 18% over the last month on month. So demand is increasing. You spoke about our per capita electricity consumption is too low. So our aspirations will grow. Our aspirations will bring in more demand, and that more demand will be only met prominently by renewable energy. The capacity additions that are going to be coming in this country, and where everybody is focusing, and our efforts are there to bring in best policies, good practices, good business cases, is renewable energy. So that is what I would like to say here. Sustainability is all about embracing the best practices, lifestyle, and obviously ensuring those technologies which emit zero or low carbon. So all these that is going to come in future for all of us. Now, when we speak of all this, I think what is there for an individual, what is there for a home, or what is there for a company, I think I see the distributed RE also is very important in this country. And it has its own immense benefits. Actually, RE, if utilized very carefully and properly, the distributed nature of the way it goes, it will be much more beneficial. So we have solar rooftops. Obviously, there are certain concerns raised by the DISCOMs, which we need to keep on trying to clarify and bring some good mechanisms so that there is a win-win situation across both the stakeholders, the generator as well as the distribution company. But rooftop is another element which everybody should contribute upon. As well as you would find we always talking about the solarizing the agriculture sector. Now, what do we do? What does this mean is that we are trying to bring in more assurance to the power supply that a farmer needs. And that assurance of power supply is also through means which is clean and green, which is solar. So obviously replacing his pump set which runs on diesel, or giving him the energy that is needed at the point it needs during the daytime through solar feeders is what the government has been focusing upon. We have some very good states. We have some good best case scenarios, best practices that several states in this country have adopted this model. There is a very good demand that is coming from the states also to ensure that we give a lot, because this program is also, there is some kind of central finance assistance that we provide to these sectors. So we are also bringing in some case studies or some interventions for livelihood applications, where RE can be a tool for our livelihood applications. We not only use electricity, but we also RE can be useful for those sectors which can use renewable energy to aid their businesses. So that concept is also in public domain. I think you must have looked at those interventions that we are trying to bring in. While we all talk of this, there is one sector which is slightly undermined in terms of the bioenergy. We do believe that, but that's an important sector. We do have biogas programs. We do have bio-CNG programs. We are also looking at biomass-based power generation, bagasse-based cogeneration. All that has been, bits and pieces have been there. 10 gigawatts of biomass-based power, bagasse-based power is installed in the country, which is performing well. But we also need to find means and how can we really look at this sector, because this sector, 228 million metric tons of biomass is surplus in this country. So we came up with a mission. The Ministry of Power came with a mission of co-firing of biomass along with the coal-based cogeneration in thermal power plants. So that is one area we are trying to move on. We are trying to promote billets and the briquettes and pellets making industry, so that raw material that is being taken from the farmers is converted and into a briquette or a pellet form, and then can be stored and then sold to supplied to the thermal power plants as and when they are needed. We are also, this ministry, the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, is working very aggressively on supporting waste to energy sector, whether it's biomass-based waste or industry-based waste, to create energy out of that. That sector is also being promoted we are bringing in some new schemes to aid this sector very well. So sustainability is taken care through all means, whether it's circular economy-based sources or whether it's solar, wind, plain vanilla. We all have to contribute towards that. And I'm sure, I think sustainability as such becomes a natural course of our life. We adopt that sustainability principles in our day-to-day business. And that's what we expect from this summit. I would really thank all of you and wish all you the best for the next course of proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jagdale. Since he has to leave a little early, so we are going to have the question session for him right now. So I'm opening it to the forum. And while you are thinking and starting with the first question, Dr. Jidale, I just have one question for you, which probably could be a start. So I see the government is very optimistic, and I'm very glad that you literally touched upon almost all the various renewable energy sources. I am a biomass energy person, so I'm very happy that you touched upon that. I know we have had years of struggle, and we continue to have struggle in bringing up bioenergy as an important source. But with all that, my question is, we are optimistic. We have policies which the government has worked on. Can you tell us if you have identified any areas of caution and where you want the private sector or the academicians to, I'm looking at the other way around. How do you see us supporting you? I know they will all ask you questions which would be the other way around. So I thought, let me start it from this way.
So what we have seen in this sector is, if you look at analyze technology by technology, there were certain interventions which were brought in wind a little way ahead in the beginning itself. So we found that the wind sector has Indian presence, has domestic presence, has built up the capacities through Indian missionaries and Indian EPCs. Slightly in solar, we had to depend on imports. And when we depend on imports, obviously we have seen several, I think few of them are in the recent years. One is the pandemic. We also see the geopolitical situation across Europe. No, we should not really go into that situation. Therefore, our effort now is to have some resilient supply chains built within India. That needs to be really taken very seriously. And when we are focusing on that, my personal request would be to focus on quality. Obviously, you have, just take an example of solar industry. Solar has its positives and negatives, and we have seen how projects were successful and how projects were as bad as they shouldn't be. So one has to take care of technology, domestic, bring in capacities, but also ensure that we live to the international standards. And each and every consumer should really demand from the industry that I would need the best of the technologies which will last for its design life.
Good. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes. Please introduce.
Kind of question, which may be, I think, appreciated by the entrepreneurs and others or the business community. The country is going to gain a lot by renewable energy, whatever projections you are making. But are you taking care of the people who are in the industry? Most of the people in the industry may be bleeding. The solar industry is bleeding, wind energy industry is bleeding. I think it is very important at this stage, whether it is road making or infrastructure, everywhere, due to our policies which are focused only on the government own final interests or public interest, you may call it. There is failure of the entrepreneur, the failure of the industry. What is your take on this? This is a very important subject, and I am from academia, but I have read and analyzed information of construction industry, road industry, and the infrastructure industry, and your renewable industry. They are all bleeding. So there will be a time when all the banks from which loans have been taken, they will cry. This aspect is always forgotten in our quest for development.
Let's hear you.
Leaving out the entrepreneur.
Understood. Let's hear him.
So if I understand you correctly, I think, are you trying to focus on that the demand has reduced and therefore there is,
No.
what was your exact?
Competition or something unfair, fair, whatever it is leaving wafer thin margins. If you analyze the industry results, you will know it.
So if you look at the...
Leave out the big players.
If you...
Leave out the big players.
I understood your question. I understood. I think what you are challenging is the way the business is governed. Now, the business is governed through a transparent bidding system, wherein I'm limiting my answer to renewable energy bids as such. I can't comment on the construction others, but as far as renewable energy is concerned, I do acknowledge that from the 2016-17 era, there has been a change in the way the business is conducted. Till 16, probably 15, 16, the tariffs were determined by the regulator on a feed-in tariff model. Whereas subsequent to that, as per the provisions of the Electricity Act 2003, the competition came into picture, and therefore the business was run on a electronic reverse auction competitive bidding process. So when that bidding started to happen, there were developers who bidded for a tariff, and based on that lowest tariff, the projects were awarded. So obviously this tariffs are determined through a very clear, transparent electronic reverse auction process. The interventions from any other stakeholder, including the government in this process, is absolutely zero. So I think the success and the outcomes that you are trying to mention, or the negativities that you are trying to mention here, I do recognize that you are trying to say that the tariffs at which the bids are awarded are wafer thin, and therefore there is no margin, and therefore it is obvious you are concluding that banks, it will be a project which may not perform. But I don't see, I think that we have two, very eminent business houses here who are a part of this success story. But I don't see such case still coming today, but I don't want to neglect your query here. We definitely would like to study this, but there has not been a single case in the renewable energy scenario as of now where a project has become a non-performing asset unless there is some other reasons which are beyond his control. So that is what we have seen. Obviously, we need to take care. I do expect that the projects that are governed also has to be on a sustainable basis. The project's tariffs are determined on a long term for 25 years. And therefore, not only it has to perform what it is committed, but it also has to take care of the sustainability aspects, its own employees, company credentials, all that has to be taken care. And I would appeal to all the developers who are into this business that they would be quoting sensibility. And I do hope that all that they take a very reasonable call and then the bid. So I don't see that expected, that happened in renewable energy, but I do take that you are bringing in a concern from your end, and we as policymakers should make a note of this. We will do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the time. We can take your question separately, please. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Move on to our next speaker, Mr. Srivatsan. Over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, from here is good. So I think it's a tough act to follow after Mr. Jagdale. I think he gave a really good overview of, I think, the sector in India, what the vision is, what the aspiration for the country is. And clearly, if we have to focus on 2030, at least 50% of it coming from renewable gives us a number somewhere between 400 and 500 gigawatts. We're at roughly, let's call it 100 something now. So it's a stretch goal for us. I mean, no doubt that, given the right pieces in place, we can certainly achieve that. But let's break the problem into probably two pieces. The first one, I think Mr. Jagdale also mentioned, Electricity is about 20% of the energy matrix of India, which means 80% is other sources of energy. Now, if you're looking to quote unquote decarbonize the energy matrix, the technology, the economics, and the road forward for electricity is in place, more or less. Solar and wind are established technologies. Now, I sympathize with your question whether they're in the money or not. That's a different question for a different day, for a different audience. But certainly it can be built, even if the energy intensity of India does grow. And I think that was mentioned as well. So let me focus on the 80%, right? Because decarbonization has to take into account what are we going to do for 80% of the energy matrix where the solution is not quite as clear. And what role does renewable energy have to play there? So clearly we think in terms of electrification, but the large uses there are certainly transportation, mobility, heating, whether it's in the industrial context or commercial residential context. And that's where most of the fuels are used. And I'd say, I'd go out on a limb, it's probably 100% hydrocarbon-based fuels for the most part. What solutions exist for that today? People talk about electrification of heating. They talk about heat pumps for commercial and residential complexes. For large industrial complexes, heat pump is not the solution. But can you start to use renewable sources or renewable derived solutions for the 80% of the energy that we used? EVs clearly are taking off all around the world. Now, if you were to follow the cost curve or the cost evolution of where lithium is going and lithium batteries are going, I have no doubt that from a two-wheeler and four-wheeler standpoint, EVs are going to become the norm within the decade, right? We can all argue whether it's 6 years, 5 years, 10 years, but it's here, it is going to happen. It will supplant internal combustion engines. It's a matter of at what time. The bigger challenge is in heavy-duty mobility. If I were to stick to road transport for now, considering marine and air transport is still a fairly, I'd say, small contributor, we can leave that alone for now. Heavy-duty mobility is a challenge. At least in today's technology, it doesn't look like electric is the right solution for heavy-duty mobility, given the torque and weight requirements and the range requirements. The weight of the battery becomes prohibitively large, so it's almost a downward spiral. You need the range and the torque, you need a heavier battery, then the truck or the bus becomes even heavier, and therefore you need an even heavier battery and so on and so forth. So we're kind of looking at that. So I'll switch to something that he mentioned, which is hydrogen. Not to say hydrogen is going to be the silver bullet to solve everybody's problems, but it's possible that green hydrogen plays an important role in the energy matrix from 3 standpoints. One is to provide a viable alternative to heavy-duty mobility. We can think about marine transportation. If you convert green hydrogen to green ammonia, is it possible? I think all of that conversation is progressing as well. The next is green hydrogen can also be used from an industrial heating standpoint, which is, I'd say, the second largest use of hydrocarbon fuels. And that is to use it where natural gas or oil-based products are used in a combustion process. So you produce heat from quote-unquote burning hydrocarbons. Can you produce the same heat from burning hydrogen? And I think there's a lot of work going on, and certainly GE has come out and talked about all the technological options to do that. So even though we are not electrifying the process, we're still using a combustion process. It's a derivative of renewable energy. It's a derivative of green electricity. So I have a feeling that green hydrogen is going to play a fairly significant role even in the industrial heating standpoint, as it will, I think, in the heavy-duty mobility. The challenge, as always, is cost. If you were to compare it to hydrocarbons, where do we stand? I think, again, Mr. Jagdale mentioned, where were we on solar before the government stepped in and said, look, for a period of time, I'm going to give you a little bit of support. So if he were here, my ask for him would be, you have to treat the 2 segments separately. The electrification segment can stand on its own 2 feet. What we're looking there is clear and consistent policies. And consistency across 2 dimensions, consistency across time and consistency across states. And I'll give you an example. A large contributor to renewable energy in India has to be the corporate sector. The corporates and the industrials are one of the largest users of energy in India and have to start looking at ways to source renewable energy. The solution is simple. The barriers are actually quite significant. Every state is looking in its own way to put roadblocks for corporates and industrial to source renewables. And these are all policy roadblocks. So when I talk about consistency, different states take different shots at it and try and break down the ability of corporates to source. And also there's no consistency over time. Are we assured as a private enterprise that when I put in an investment on the ground for 25 years, that the laws will not change after 3 years? And at this point, do we have that kind of comfort? To a certain extent, yes, but there's always the fear at the back of your mind that who knows what's going to happen. So a clear policy framework that's also consistent. The second is support given to the entire value chain in the ecosystem. Today, we heard about being self-sufficient in solar modules. We're going to hear the same thing about battery storage, about electrolyzers. Support is good as long as there's a clear view on what that support means and how long it will last. It cannot be an open-ended blank check. And I think we're all, unfortunately, on this issue, there appear to be divergent views, at least on two sides of the table. The module manufacturers love ALMM and BCD. Can't say necessarily the same for those of us who need to buy the modules, right? I think we have a slightly different take on that. So what we need is really a consistency to say it's okay to have it, but how long is it going to last and how is it actually implemented? And is it actually, are there unforeseen, I'd say, consequences of having that policy in place? So a clear roadmap from the standpoint of the government, a clear and consistent regulatory framework that lasts for a period of time. I have no doubt that not just the solar, wind, hybrid storage market will take off, but India is really no further behind on green hydrogen than any other country in the world. And this is a chance for us as a country to take a lead here and say, how do you use green hydrogen in hard to abate sectors and green the energy matrix of the country as a whole? Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll come back to, I have many questions myself, but we'll come back to it. Over to you, Mr. Gupta.
Thank you. So first of all, while we talk about scaling up of renewable energy, so government has already announced, government has already committed that we have to be net zero by 2070. So when we say net zero, we are not saying everything is coming from renewable energy, as Mr. Jagdale has also mentioned, again, 20%, 80% kind of mechanism. But ultimately, we have to focus on circular economy. So when we say circular economy, so whatever waste we are generating, we have to recycle that also. When we focus particularly on renewable energy, let's say solar, wind, and battery, etc. So solar waste also will also be generated after 25, 30 years of running operation. So we have to start working in that direction, how to recycle that. Because if we will not recycle that, there will be a challenge tomorrow, again, to achieve this net zero target. Same is with respect to battery system also. If we don't recycle that, because there will be a life of 8, 10 years, 15 years, maybe. So then we have to recycle that. So we have to utilize all these things which will be generated as a waste. And once we say renewable, so renewable, from where this renewable is coming today? Earlier we were talking about pure solar, earlier we were saying pure wind. Now it is a combination of many things. It's solar, it's plus wind, plus solar, plus wind, plus storage. Then we will talk about waste to energy also. Then we will say EV charging infra fed by renewable energy, because we are focusing on EV sector, and EV charging infra also we are putting up. But that EV charging infra, ultimately we are using electricity which is generated by coal-based plant. But then that we have to focus that it also has to come from the renewable energy. Then we are already talking about the green hydrogen, green ammonia, and hydrogen mission, where 5 metric ton of hydrogen, green hydrogen to be generated by 2030. There will be obligation also on fulfilling that requirement. Then we have to, energy efficiency is part of it. So there are many, many things involved to achieve net zero target by 2070. So we can't focus only on one thing, but we have to focus on many, many things here. And now if we have to divide this 2070 target into many, many decades now, because that is still, I would say 50 years away to achieve the target. So at least every decade basis, we have to have our plan. So at least for first decade, government is already announced that we have to achieve 500 gigawatt of renewable by 2030. So all those 500 gigawatt now has to be added on every decade. So every decade we have to have 500 gigawatt to achieve this net zero target. Now, again, if we have to divide this target further, so now we know 500 gigawatt by 2030. Now we have to have plan for every 5 years or 3 to 5 years plan. So in that 3 to 5 years plan, if government will come out with clear vision how they will achieve this partly, then the infrastructure can be developed accordingly. Because if there will not be any infrastructure for that, no power evacuation system for that, no availability of land for that, we will not achieve all this target. So step by step we have to approach it. Now we have the bigger vision, step by step approach we have to take. So in case we don't achieve that, we will be nowhere in that scenario. Then as Mr. Iyer mentioned, regulatory and taxation support is always required, because we have seen how in last 2-3 years, how much industry has suffered. Because when an investor participate in a bid, they have many assumptions they take. They don't oversee what is going to happen tomorrow. Whatever they can analyze with respect to, let's say, module cost, land cost, etc., or wind turbine cost, they can analyze next 2-3 years. But these kind of taxation, change in regulatory framework, or termination of PPA, or many other things which has happened in last 2-3 years. So we don't foresee those challenges while we participate in a bid. So those things has to be definitely has to be taken care through a policy network, because companies can't go under change in law, companies can't approach the court, etc. Because if you go there, there is no solution for 3-4 years. You incur the cost today, and getting the money back may take 3-4 years, 5 years. I would say even for the first project, which has come under this safeguard regulatory regime, they are yet to get any money from whether it was a SECI, NTPC, or state discom. So they are yet to get the real result, yet to get their money back. So these issues, I think, need to be addressed. That is very important. And it's a very competitive market, I would say. In this competitive market, investor interest has to be taken care of. The investor interest has shaken up in last 2-3 years of many challenges. Now I think the time has come. These has to be taken care of when we have a bigger role. And one more important thing I would like to highlight on the energy consumption front. Now per capita consumption is very small. We are maybe at the 10th number, 10th spot globally in the per capita electricity consumption. Even if we talk about next 10 years also, we will still be at 10th position in that frame. But one very important thing which is happening due to urbanization today, the air conditioning consumption is increasing. The demand, from where the electricity demand is coming, mainly it is coming from air conditioning consumption. So right now we have peak demand in the early morning hours, and the peak hours. Peak hours are between, let's say, 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. But if we will analyze the future 5-6 years from now, the peak demand is going to be shift towards the daytime, because the consumption demand is going to be more during the daytime. So I think we have to focus in that direction also. There solar will play a very important role. So I think we are in the right direction from the government policy front. Only things is we have to take care for the many things so that we can achieve our goal.
Thank you. And before we can take a quick few questions, but just before that, I just wanted to ask one question to you out of the many that came into my mind. So how do you look at the adoption of the green, of the hydrogen first? Because the green hydrogen comes later. You know, you generate green hydrogen, and then you can't look for the adoption. The adoption and the market must be created much before. And that then becomes a gray or a blue hydrogen. It is not green. So how do you see that being taken care of?
No, it's a great question. Again, if I were to break the problem up, Mr. Jittali mentioned it. The easiest use case is where people already consume hydrogen: refineries, fertilizers, glass polishing, and so on. All they have to do is change the source. They say, okay, I get it from ABC, now I'm just going to get it from B. The bigger challenge is in new use cases. DRI, in the steel process, heavy duty mobility, for example, burning in furnaces to substitute for LPG or natural gas. I don't even think we necessarily need gray hydrogen to do that. It's a chicken or egg situation right now. conversations we have with customers is let's go and do it. And they say, I can't afford it. The cost of green hydrogen is so much higher. I said, the ecosystem as a whole needs to gain experience by going up the experience curve and building capacity. You cannot go there unless somebody wants to build. You cannot build if it's not competitive. And I think that's where the government steps in, right? It's either use mandates or it's, equivalence of VGF schemes. What really we're looking for the entire ecosystem to do, whether it's producers, whether it's consumers, is to say, I'm willing to take a leap of faith and give it a shot on a small scale. Because the good news for green hydrogen is it's a scalable technology.
Right.
I use the analogy of Lego blocks, right? You put one Lego block and then you can put 10 on top of it.
Yeah.
But you need to start with that one, otherwise nothing is going to move.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I have been asked to complete it fast. May I request that lady, please? Yeah, yourself.
Thank you so much. Myself, I'm Vidhi. I'm from Mumbai. My question was, since we are looking at upscaling on the renewable energy part, how are we tackling the ecological impacts that come along with the infrastructure that is involved, especially wind and solar? How are we going to look at circular economy is one thing which we really need to consider, but how about the ecological impacts that come along with it? And wouldn't working even in the area of improving energy efficiency actually balance the demand so that we don't have to invest more on the infrastructure, but parallelly also work on the efficiency part? Thank you.
Thank you. Question.
No, I think it's a great question. And I think he talked a lot about circular economy, and I think it's very relevant. And that's something the industry needs to start thinking of now, not 20 years from now when, suddenly you see I've got to take care of all of these waste assets. In terms of the ecological balance, right, of all these sources of energy, I would claim renewable energy probably has the least negative impact on the environment. Not that it doesn't have an impact, it certainly does. Some of the new areas that we should start thinking of, and this is actually being done commonly in Europe now, is to think of what we call agrovoltaics, right? So instead of saying farmland can never be used, you actually say, why don't you build solar on the farmland? And there are certain types of crops that actually benefit from being in the shade, especially given the Indian context where we expect temperatures to rise. Why don't you take advantage of land that's already being used for certain crops and build solar on top of it, and both benefit actually, right? And solar also has an important role to play in new areas of hydroponics, for example, vertical farming. But in terms of the overall ecological impact, an existing asset does use up land, and land is valuable. So we need to start thinking in terms of how do you minimize the amount of, I'd say, usable land that you use for solar. And again, a solution mentioned was there's plenty of rooftops all over India. Right? So we need to start thinking about using that as available space, but that gives you a different problem in terms of distributed generation and microgrids. How does that link into larger grids? Problems that can be solved. We shouldn't start thinking about, oh, it's too big of a problem, microgrids, let's not solve it. No, let's build on rooftops and figure out how to best integrate them into the grid or to create small microgrids. So I hope I've answered your question, but I went a couple of different directions there.
Yeah, maybe just to add on this. So we are already, in India also, with respect to wind, if we talk about, so earlier, whatever wind power plant were put up, so they were using the entire area, few kilometers of area where they were putting up wind power plant. But nowadays, you need only 1 acre land per turbine. Per turbine, let's say size of 3.5 megawatt. So you need only 1 acre land for putting up that. Balance of the land, you are still putting up the crops. So you are generating vegetables and all everything. So in fact, the effective utilization is now, I think people are following now. So they are understanding the requirement of, the importance of the land. They are really appreciating that now.
Great. With that, we are done with the time. So I have got two reminders from him. So thank you so much. My takeaway from this is we are in the right direction. We must have clear and consistent policies. And I think that's the ask from the government. And let's see if we can connect with them on that, and let's hope that we will be going green very, very soon, steadily though. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am, and thank you to all the panelists for the enriching session. Sorry. Now we'll be starting with the session on clean air and better life shortly. So please be seated.
Very good evening, ladies and gentlemen.